Welcome and good evening to the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for August 7th, 2019. It is National Lighthouse Day. I thought I'd make a mention of that. I don't think we have any in our community, but celebrate the lighthouses around America. Yeah. Item number 1, roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Brennan?
Here.
Councilmember Lehman?
Here.
Councilmember Whiting?
Here.
Councilmember Contreras?
Here.
Mayor Mars?
Here, thank you. Item 2, let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item number 3, approval of the agenda. Mr. Reynolds, are there any changes, corrections?
Not, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Counselor Whiting?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'm sorry. I'd like to pull,
We're not
under
on
consent.
oh, that's on consent, I'm sorry.
I have a motion on the table for approval of the agenda.
A second.
I have a second by Counselor Contreras. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 4, consent agenda. Mr. Reynolds, any additions, subtractions?
Nothing from staff, sir.
Counselor Lehman?
4D2.
For D2.
He beat me to it.
He beat you to it. All right. Others? Counselor Lehman?
Move the consent agenda as modified.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan. Before we vote, then, we would read the modified consent agenda into the public record. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. These are the consent agenda items for August 7th of 2019. 4A1 approves the minutes from the July 16th, 2019 meeting. 4A2 approves the updated information security and technology use policy. 4A3 approves a contract with McPhillips Brothers Roofing Company in an amount not to exceed $27,400 to perform maintenance on the police department and library roofs. 4A4 approves the application and grants a tobacco license to Rambo On Records at 221 First Avenue East and to La Quita at 810 First Avenue East. 4A5 ratifies the city administrator's approval of the Pullman Club's request to use a section of the public parking lot in front of their business for an event and suspends City Code 114.11, allowing the consumption of alcohol in the parking lot for August 3rd, 2019 from 5 to 7 p.m. 4B1 approves the DNR Outdoor Recreation Grant Agreement. 4B2 adopts resolution number R201 TAC 086, which approves the final plat of Veerling Plaza, second edition. 4B3 adopts resolution number R2019 TAC 083, which approves the preliminary and final plat of Canterbury Park, 9th edition, with conditions. 4C1 declares 5 forfeited vehicles held by the police department as surplus property and authorizes their proper sale or disposal. And finally, 4D1 adopts resolution number R2019 TAC 084, which approves a new county state aid highway designation for a portion of County Road 69.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I have a motion on the table and a second. The modified consent agenda has been read into the public record. There would be no further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 5. Now I'd like to call on any resident that would like to come and speak on an item not on the agenda. Please come forward. State your name and address for the record.
My name is Michael Stevens, and I believe maybe you're gonna talk about it, and that's when I should be talking to you about removal of the signs, no parking signs on Bluff Avenue. So would you rather I talk to you a little now, or?
We could wait till the item and it's right after this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other resident like to come forward and speak on an item not on the agenda? Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and welcome. Seeing none, then, we would move ahead to item 6, business removed from consent agenda. For D2, Counselor Lehman.
Mayor, I took it off consent because I was contacted by some residents that wanted to speak to it. So I started thinking a little harder on the topic myself, and I guess here's my thought process on looking at this. This is probably one of the most unique areas of town, being that it was one of our first settled areas of town. I have no idea when the plat was made. I'm guessing in the 1800s sometime. I'm not sure we really know where the property lines are, where the road right-of-way is, and I'm a little bit concerned if we might end up having people parking on the side of the road and actually be parking on private property, which would be a problem. So I guess I'd like to find out what the road right-of-way width is, and then what the actual blacktop is, and it doesn't have a curb, so we don't really have any delineation by the use of a curb. Putting one in would be a recon project, because it never had one. And some of the properties have no access other than street parking. They don't have driveways, and a lot of them are fronted pretty close to the road in that area, so there's a whole gamut of issues, I guess, I'd like to see us work through first.
Do we want to have a comment, Steve? Do you want to write road width?
Yeah, Mayor and City Councils, good evening. I'm looking at a map on my computer here, and it's about a 60-foot city right-of-way. The roadway width it varies obviously, but it's about, and then it doesn't want to work, but it's about a 30 to 35-foot roadway, and I'm just estimating, my computer locked up here. The roadway appears to be pretty well centered within the right-of-way, so there isn't much for any encroachment issues that I see, or that would concern me as far as parking on private property, because the roadway and parking areas are well within the right-of-way, so that part wouldn't concern me at all on the city's end of it.
Counselor Lehman, concerns that it's not guttered or a curb?
Well, if you park off the side of the road, there's nothing to tell you where that line is.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's some houses down there, not very much room between the house and the actual blacktop, so. And then some that have no other option but to park on the road.
Right. So parking's already allowed there for that access points?
For the resident it is,
Right.
but they can't park there if there's somebody else there.
Counselor Whiting?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had someone talk to me about this last night also at our Night to Unite. So I took a little second look at it, and it looks to me that each house has a driveway. There might be one that's a little tight. So there's not really a parking access for the homeowners. And I know that this has a historic issue and concern with it back to a former bar that used to be down there, and there was tight parking, and people would want to park down there, so if they had a few drinks, they could walk to their car and maybe miss out on one of our local PD, but there was some trash issues and noise issues when bar closing came, and people would get in their cars and make a lot of noise, and that was always a concern. And I know there was always a concern during Derby days, because this had been no parking, so some of the residents were given the opportunity to park people on their lawns and charge a fee. So I see this as something that was a necessity in the past, and I know I would love my street is, resident parking only too, and this is one of those rare spots that it happens in the city. But I'm wondering if, time has elapsed where the issue is no longer a concern, and the fact that, once you have resident parking only, you want to keep it. You want to make sure it's kind of nice, somebody parking in front of your house, but it is your house, and it is a public street, so people can park, not here because it's marked. So I'm wondering if the times have changed far enough so that this could be upgraded to, the rest, same as the rest of the city.
Counselor Brennan?
I'm just wondering what the history of why why we're looking at it now. And at the east end and the west end, where the red line is not indicating a change, if what that currently is at, is it resident-only parking, or is it for open parking?
Steve, did you want to comment on why this doesn't extend to the west along Bluff to Huber Park and as well as to the east to at least Marshall?
Mayor and council members, that would be because the red area there for the 3-block area is the only location where those signs exist, so there's nothing to remove. The only other restriction on Bluff would be just east of the gas station there around the curve, where we have restricted from parking for sight lines and safety issues. So beyond that, there really aren't any other parking restrictions in this area.
Mr. Stevens, would you like to come forward and voice your opinion on this matter? This isn't a public hearing, but
Yeah.
we value your input. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the council hearing me. We've had a lot of truck traffic. There's been semis on the south side of the street from my house. I live at 823 East Bluff Avenue. And they take up half the road. And matter of fact, person that cuts the grass for Kentucky Fried Chicken was just down there the other day with a pickup and a trailer where he unloaded on the street. And he was taking up almost half. And the problem is the street is, I don't know if it's 30 feet wide there, but it's not. If you have a semi parked here and then you let people park on the other side of the street, good luck going through there and meeting somebody. And I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a lot of bicycles on Bluff right now too. And the more traffic or parking we have, they're gonna have to additionally go out into the street. But just a little past history, I really was appreciative to any of you that were still on the council when we put them up. Because we really had a disturbance down there. And the restaurant there that used to be the bar or whatever it's gonna be, if that would change into a bar again, they had overflow parking in Kentucky Fried Chicken. They were up and down our streets, parked, and at 1 o'clock in front of the house, they'd come out drunk and yell. And you know what bars do to people. And they used to urinate in our bushes. Toilet paper would be there, and beer cans and beer bottles. And it was a big nightmare. Besides, the building was an off-sale liquor when it first started. Then it changed it into a bar. And then they turned into having music. And the acoustic in the tin part of it, which used to be the off-sale, you might as well be sitting right in the bar when you're listening to it. They tried to do some work with that, but they never have accomplished it. So if for some strange reason that it ever went back to a bar again, I surely hope the council would make them redo something so they can keep their music in there. But I'd really hate to lose that no parking there. It isn't that big of a burden for people that go down to Huber Park. It's just like they flood across the railroad tracks. They flood all the neighborhoods up there for a day or two. If that was the only reason that you wanted to change, I would maybe say that would be fine for if you had a big doing. But just to open it up for all the semis, and if you remember right, when Super America was put in down there and Jack's truck stop closed, they were worried about all the truck traffic parking. And along the south side of that street down there, there was no truck parking. You had no truck parking signs, because a lot of them are parking down there now. And you have to travel the road. And like I told Jody here, just yesterday morning, or was the day before, there was 2 semis. Marshall comes and makes the curve, and on the side where the Mystic Lake Casino places have, there was 2 semis parked there. And when we confronted the fire marshal about it, they said they weren't, when there was a lot of cars parked there for the doings in the park, they said they would come down Marshall or the other street to get, if there was a fire. But if these streets are gonna be blocked with more and more trucks, they're not coming down that way either. And there was 2 big tandem trucks that come around the corner, went down Bluff to the east, turned up Dakota because they wanted to go to Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I don't blame them for that. But these businesses have no parking places. And you mentioned you wouldn't mind people parking up on your street. That probably isn't the deal. But how about semis? How about big tandem trucks? And that's all that's going down there. And there's getting to be more and more because of Speedway down there now is getting to be a real truck. And if you've noticed, they've been parking in Perkins parking lot already too. So there's more and more down there. So I really would be pleased if you could keep the residential parking because some of them do look at it. There is some truckers that don't care, but some of them just run in, grab their bag of food and come out and go. It isn't sitting there for hours. But when the bar was there, you know, I used to complain too. There would be a couple guys that had their tractor parked in Kentucky Fried Chicken parking lot because they kicked them out over by the bar. And when the bar would close, they would come out with the gals from the bars, and they'd be in their tractors, and they'd leave them running. So when you're in your bedroom in the house, all you can hear is that diesel, even though it's just idling. And then they'd have a music on in there, so it didn't end with the bar. But I don't know what's ever gonna go in there, whether it be another restaurant or what. But no matter what you stick in there, they don't have the parking. I think you should widen Dakota maybe, just in front of along Kentucky Fried. But it's been so peaceful living down there all these years. I've lived on Bluff Street for over 68 years. I've lived 49 years in the house I'm in right now. And them years that the bar and all the parking was down there was not a nice place. I mean, you could have pulled your hair out of your head. So to go back to that again, it probably wouldn't happen today. Maybe not. Maybe it would. I've seen people down there stop in front of the house dealing drugs. We got more of that in Shakopee now too, so. I just would at least keep it for a while yet, while I'm still up here. And me and the wife, I got in my house, so it's wheelchair access. We can just roll right in. There's no steps. Got double railings on the stairs. I don't go upstairs very much, or don't want her going upstairs. I mean, you move in one of these other places, and I have the same luxuries there. But the parking is the main issue. Please leave it the way it is.
Okay, Counselor Lehman?
I've got a map here, it's kind of small, and I'm looking at your property on this little map. But do you have the space between your house and the property line to park? Looks
I
like-
have a little driveway in there, yes, I do.
Looks pretty tight, isn't it?
Well, the fence you see is the property line. There's a wood fence there. I have a chain link fence there that was put up years and years ago when the kids were young, so keep them in the yard. There's probably, 15 feet
This one here.
in between there. But that's not all the issue, you know, if you ever decide to put curb and cutter down there. My house sits down just a little, it's the highest point in the Bluff Avenue down there. And my front part where I park, there's all lime rock sticking out of there. When I hooked up the city sewer it cracked one part of my house a little bit because they had to do blasting. And if they're gonna have to lower that whole hump down, I know they have different ways of doing it nowadays, but I'm just fearful that my house is gonna fall down someday if they keep doing all that, because it's built on the lime rock. So that's the other issue, and I wouldn't appreciate it coming out of my front door and have 2, 3 cars parked on the street right in front of my house, even if I did park in the driveway. I'm sure you wouldn't either if you had to walk right out your front door, and, you know, so it's really better to leave it as is for now anyway yet.
Well, we all live, I think, on public streets, and there is parking allowed, and yes, you wish that, I know like Rhythm on the Rails is tonight, and I'm sure our older community there, they're parked along the city streets and the avenues, and maybe in
They
front
are
of.
in front of my house.
In front of your house. It does happen, and I do understand the quietness. I drive that road every once in a while, and it seems pretty peaceful down there, but it is a public street. I think that bar problem, you know, I think has been going empty for 10 years. What if it turned into a family restaurant? And would we view it any different? Because there probably not gonna have a band or a concert. And that, I think that neighborhood has seen some redevelopment in the last 10 years. So, I'm trying to think about that it is a public street. But I know that a lot of care years ago went into closing that to public parking, because of some of the issues. I think that some of those issues don't exist anymore. Counselor Whiting?
Thank you. This is a question for staff. Is there an opportunity to make it no semi-parking?
Mayor and council members, it's a difficult one, and we're actually looking at an issue, if I can expand the area to the east by the gas station. So there are no parking restrictions there, and we do have complaints of semis parking on Bluff in that area overnight. And I think the ordinance says that trucks are not allowed to overnight park in residential areas. So in that area by the gas station, one half of the street is residential, the other is commercial retail. But now on the area that we're talking about under this council action here, most of the area is residential. So they are prohibited under the current ordinance from parking in that area overnight. And I'm not, you know, could it happen during the day? Certainly. Do we have parking restrictions in other parts of towns that restrict parking for trucks? I don't think we do. And we talked about that with the PD, and it's a little more difficult. It's a possibility, but we don't have it in town, so we'd have to further consider that.
Any more questions for Mr. Stevens?
Here,
Counselor Lehman?
there's actually a car in this picture parked in front of your house, and it's half on private property and half on the road right away.
It's
And it looks like
not on the road right away. It's parked in front of my house,
right, but
but it's on the part that I'm supposed to maintain. That's the
well,
street width.
this map has it straddling the property line.
Yeah.
We know these maps are not accurate when we look at them like this, so
Okay.
for property.
But I try and stay off of Bluff Street only because of the speeding traffic that goes by. And if you've been familiar with some of the people that do park on Bluff Street, the cities plow right next, they go right past my vehicle. They never have to move I don't have to move my vehicle. I remove the snow that they plow up to it. So there's none of the snow, I'm not a snowbird.
You're tucked in far enough.
Yep, yes, I am, and I'm parked on Lime Rock. So it doesn't get soft in the spring.
Mayor and council members, if I could add a point, certainly there's some uniqueness to Bluff Avenue when it comes to parking. It's not a typical roadway with curb and gutter as was indicated, and some of the driveway front yards area act like an entire driveway. In this case, it appears and acts like a driveway to the property, almost the entirety of the front property. And there's other properties like that, some businesses recently that we worked with to clear up some parking issues. But there's been some latitude in leaving those areas as if they're parking areas, as if they're driveway areas. So I wouldn't expect any change in this regard to that. And I think generally people acknowledge that that's a driveway and they're not going to park on the road in front of this area. My perception anyways, if I could offer that.
When there was one year when people parked down there, I think it was for the doings in the park. And I had my car parked off the road on the deal, but then there was some cars that started parking, so I might not have been able to get back out. That's why that's another issue there. And people, I don't know, sometimes they just don't think. They just want to get to the doings, and I don't blame them, but whether we build a park or we have a restaurant or we have a bar, even if it goes to a restaurant, he has maybe, if he's got 30 parking spots on his property, he's lucky. So I don't even know how it can get a permit to operate. Because I think still half of it belongs to the other neighbor to the north, unless they work out something, agreement that used to be there years ago. But there's gonna be, people are just gonna be parking on the streets if you want them to use them businesses. And
Mr. Stevens, thank you very much for
Yeah.
your input.
well, thanks very much for taking the time. I tried to cover what I pretty much wanted, but
Thank you.
think in your heart, please.
Counselor Contreras?
This is for staff too, I just have a question in regards to the written and the verbal request we received. Is there a reason why they're deciding to remove these signs? Is there, yeah.
Mayor and council members, I don't have that information in front of me, but I actually think one of the requests came from one of your fellow council members to look at this. And we, so that would have been verbal. And a written request, I am not remembering off the top of my head where the written request came from. So it wasn't a staff-driven issue here. So that's what I know off the top of my head.
Thank you.
I think that, I wasn't on the council when this residential parking went into effect here, but I remember discussion back a long time ago about the doings and the impact. And that was many years ago. And now it's become a peaceful street that, at least in this section, but I think the doings and the impact have changed or lessened dramatically. Yes, that bar has, could come back, but possibly if it comes back under a conditional use, that we can have enough conditions on it. Certainly had some history of problems. If it turns into a family restaurant, that we could still do that, might have some different things. I know there's been some redevelopment on the east end of this area. But if it's a public road, and I've driven down there too, and I think that to me, the peacefulness of the road aids very well for parking on the street, because it's not I don't know if it's in its day was an area that you would drag along.
Probably was back then, but it probably wasn't modern cars.
More wagon.
Wagon races, maybe.
Counselor Whiting?
I understand the concerns of the residents, and, but I also feel that, having this one section with, resident parking only, and it is difficult because it is residential right next to a business development. So I understand the problems. I do sympathize with the truck traffic, and I wish we could do something about that. Maybe that could be looked into a little further. But to me, having an exclusive no parking area in one part of town and not the rest, I find that even, a little more difficult than some of the concerns. So with that, I would offer to approve the removal of the local residential parking only restriction along Bluff Avenue.
And I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion. I think some of these things are, I think this area has changed, but I know when O'Brien's open, people were parking on the public streets, and, we heard from the residents then, but, these are public streets. I know that we painted some stalls along one avenue there and made them, the cars, so they wouldn't park so close to the corner, so the sight lines are available. I don't, this isn't a major road like Spencer, where you do that, but that's kind of how I feel. Any other discussion? Steve, did you have another comment?
Yes, I did, Mayor and council members. I found the correspondence, and it was info from a council member that received a discussion from a resident that felt it was an injustice that this parking restriction still remained on this road because the bar was gone. So we were asked to look into it.
Thanks for the background. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Passes 3-2. Thank you very much. No other business that was removed from consent. We would move ahead then to 7A, a vacation of a public alley on Block 7, City of Shakopee plat. Michael, welcome. Counselor Lehman?
Motion to open a public hearing?
Second.
I have a motion and a second to open the public hearing. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Public hearing is now open. Michael, you may present.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So this is the vacation of the alley between Atwood and Scott Street. As all of you know, this block is scheduled for redevelopment. There are other items on the agenda tonight to clear up the last two properties. We've been working with utilities. As part of that, all of these utilities will be relocated and this block will be replatted and it won't be necessary anymore. So as part of that replatting process, we need to get rid of this alley.
The city's the applicant here.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Questions of staff? I have one. If there's some utilities in the alley?
Mayor and Council, yeah, there's a existing, I think it's steel natural gas line, which the gas company is going to reroute and replace with plastic or whatever they use. Spuck has some lines that will be relocated into a new duct bank on Levy Drive, and there are some small wire utilities that will also go adjacent to that duct bank.
In typical cities, when utilities have infrastructure in a public right-of-way and that their roadway gets vacated or some need is there, the utilities remove those, their utility infrastructure at their cost?
So Mayor and Council, when an alley is being abandoned for private development, it's back on the city. However, all the small wire utilities are relocating largely at their expense. The gas company, this is an older line, which they want to relocate anyway. The new building going on this site will be a major customer for natural gas. The current line that's there wouldn't be able to serve them anyway, so they're fine with removing that. The only utility that I'm aware of as of now will be Spuck that will be charging to relocate, and they'll be going up onto Levy Drive in a new duct bank underground, and Spuck's also working at, if you remember, there's an old set of wires that are main trunk lines that are on the bluff that would be removed and also go in that duct bank.
Okay. Counselor Lehman?
I'm looking at the map on the screen, and the white line is over top of Levy Drive.
So Mayor and Council, this is an old Shakopee plat. So the city owns this parcel here, we actually own all of this today. However, this was never put into right-of-way, so as part of this, we're working with the city engineer and the developer to decide, what happens to this road. The original concept was it was going to be a right angle. We're still working on the final plan, but there'll be some right-of-way either for utilities, road, sidewalk, whatever, that's still open. But it'll be rededicated as part of the new plat.
The reason I asked, Mayor, was I'd hate to see any utilities moved over to the levy and then find out there's gonna be a building on top of it.
Mayor and council, we won't be putting a building on top of the utilities. So they're AE2S, who's one of our consultants, is also their consultant, and they're all working together on utility relocations.
Other questions of staff? Other questions of staff? If not, thank you.
I do have one more.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Counselor Lehman.
The natural gas needs for this block in the future are more than what the current line going to it can supply. Do we know where the bigger line is and how far back that is and what has to get tore up in order to make that connection?
Mayor and council, I believe in this area, again, it's the old steel line, which they're getting rid of. Their current plan is wherever the duck bank goes on Levy Drive, they'll be adjacent to it, probably up in the curb line or the other side of the curb in the park, because they don't want to be near the other utilities, and it'll be upgraded to whatever size is necessary to serve this development and any other future needs in the area. So we already have in the CIP a reconstruction of Levy Drive from here all the way down. As part of that, the duck bank would go in and any of the other upgrading of utilities. This road is in really bad shape right now, and so it's kind of apropos that we're doing this.
Counselor Whiting?
I'll just be guessing here, but to answer your question, I assume that the Levy Drive apartment has a pretty good gas line going into that. So they would be tying it back to wherever that line was
Some
in.
bigger line,
Yeah, I can assume it's by that big apartment building.
road somewhere down there.
Yeah.
Other questions of staff? If not, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor and council.
Good evening. This is a public hearing. Any resident that would like to come forward and make comment on this vacation? This is a public hearing. Come forward and make comment on this application for vacation of the alleyway. Counselor Whiting?
I'll move to close the public hearing.
A second.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Brennan to close public hearing. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Counselor Contreras?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt resolution number R2019-085, a resolution vacating all of the alley in Block 7, City of Shakopee plat.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all. Let's move ahead then. I will entertain a motion to stand in recess for the EDA. Counselor Lehman.
Motion to recess to the economic development meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to stand in recess for the EDA. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Mr. President.
Thank you. I'd like to call to order the August 7th, 2019 meeting of the Shakopee Economic Development Authority. Please make note of the roll. First item would be approval of the agenda. Mr. Lehman?
Motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion and a second by Mr. Mars to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Third item on the agenda here is consent business, which includes the EDA minutes. Mr. Lehman?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and a second by Contreras to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are on to general business, item 4. Item 4A, modification of TIF District Number 19, contract for private development for Riverfront Bluff redevelopment. Mr. Kursky.
Mr. President, board members, so this is the first amendment to this agreement. As we just discussed, you'll see other items on the agenda tonight. If you remember, we had an agreement for this project that did not include the three properties on the corner. We either have them under contract or are acquiring those as we speak. You just abandoned the alley. Now we have a project that includes the entire block. It has increased the size of the project and hence the size of the TIF. Baker Tilly has run new numbers. The city also had additional costs over time. Those have now been rolled into the note so that the way the agreement is now is the city gets just over $1 million of the TIF. The developer gets the balance. We also get paid back after construction loan closing the $500,000 that you see in tonight's agreement. They'll roll that into their TIF note for the two properties that remain on the block. The project's gone from just about 150 units with the restaurant to about 170 units. They're also looking right now at potentially doing some retail at the corner of Atwood and First Avenue. So all those numbers have been rolled into the new TIF numbers. It's now about a $29 million project. You will see, we'll bring back to you when we get the final designs. They're working on a couple different concepts, things that really have not been in the Shakopee community before, like potentially a drive-up entranceway for deliveries and things like that for the apartment building, but they're still in design work and they'll be working with engineering on utilities and the road reconstruction, but we're moving along.
Any questions of staff?
We also have our counsel here tonight for the EDA if there's any questions.
Member Mars.
Mr. President, thank you. So moving up the number of units to a total of 170 now, is that correct?
Mayor, that's correct.
Okay, and a couple more questions.
Go ahead.
Then I see that the EDA percentage of the TIF share has moved up slightly, is that correct?
Mr. President and board members, so again, we acquired the Peter Wynn's property, the house next to Doggy Doos, so that's gotten rolled into the note. The other two properties will get paid cash back at the closing for the construction loan, so those are not in our TIF note. That cost will be on the developer in their TIF note.
Okay, and then third question, Mr. President. Michael, trying to get the handle on the total build-out value of this project now with the new and improved units?
So, Mr. President and board members, so the estimate right now is 29 million. They have it kind of what I'll call the early estimates out to some local contractors to bid. As you know, the Enclave project downtown came about $1 million over budget, and they've been able to absorb that because thankfully interest rates have dropped considerably since we started this process a year and a half ago. So this morning, actually, the borrowing rate for 20 years was just a little above 2%. So this project, we don't know what the interest rates will be next year, but they're hoping that they'll still be able to keep the project costs in line with their original estimates.
But about 29 million of,
$29 million in total project costs.
in value? That's the question, okay. That's it?
Any other questions of staff? Questions of staff? Do we want to hear from our TIF person on this, or?
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. Julie Eddington with Kennedy and Graven. I represent you as your development attorney.
Welcome.
I've worked with Michael on this amendment. As you know, we drafted and executed the original contract back in 2018. Things have changed, and so they've added, now we have a first amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions about the amendment that anyone might have.
Any questions of the board? Called you up for nothing, thank you.
I
I'm
would
sorry,
like-
go ahead, Mr.
I
Lehman.
would like to clarify that there's tax increment, so the EDA will get 10% of that off the top as for their administrative costs. And then there's 90% left, and the EDA will get about 22.3% of that, and the developer will get the rest of that. So when we talk about those percentages, we're talking about percentages of the 90% that's left.
Thank you. Mr. Lehman?
Mr. Chair, so I'm looking at the, it doesn't have a page number on it. Projected pay-go note report. First page, it's where it shows the total principal from 21 to 48 of 37,700, and then the total interest of 3,620,000 for a combined total of 7,371,000.
And those are the TIF runs that were done by Baker Tilly.
Right? So, and then when I look at semi-annual net revenue, total is a 7,371,000. Surplus tax increment, 250.
The $250 at the end of the page?
Right.
Michael, I think Michael can maybe answer that question.
So, Mr. President, board members, that's just kind of what was left over when they ran it out. As Ms. Eddington explained, so you see there's some delay in them getting their revenue, and so that drives up the interest. The same is true on the city or the EDA's note that gets paid back to the city. That $250 is just money left over at the end of the 25 or 26 years. But as she did mention, we get 10% off the top that goes to the EDA itself, and then we get 23% of the 90%, and they get the balance of that 90%. So their note's at the statutory 5%, and ours is at the statutory 4%. And actually, they could get higher, but that was what we negotiated at 5%.
So I guess my question is, what actual dollar amount goes back toward the project?
So, board members and Mr. President, so the actual dollars the developer will spend out of pocket's $3.75 million.
Okay?
And the city has spent, or will have spent, $1,078,600. That's without interest, that's today's money. So basically, their $3 million's worth $7 million on increment. If there are no increases in property values, et cetera, taxes, it would take the 26 years to pay off. We've seen on most of these notes that get paid off earlier.
Any further questions, Mr. Lehman?
Well, I'm trying to subtract the 20% is going to EA, and 10% is going to somebody else.
No,
and-
so there's one big bucket.
Yep.
So as the money, so $1 comes in, 10 cents of that dollar goes back to the EDA just for administration.
Okay?
So now you got 90 cents left over. 23% of the 90 cents goes to the EDA to pay its $1 million, and whatever is remaining of that 90 cents goes to the developer to pay back his $3.7 million.
Okay?
Mr. Myers, we can come back to your question.
And the difference in the numbers is ours is at 4%, theirs is at 5%, so the interest is different over time. As you know, on a mortgage, 1% makes a pretty big difference.
Mr. President, staff and council, but the note is capped at 3.750 of dollars.
Mr. President, board members, that's correct. So
Then if, my follow-up question is, this is based on the projected value with no inflationary factor involved in the value of the property, is that correct?
Mr. President and board members, that's correct for either note. So theoretically, both the city note and the developer's note would be paid off earlier because there's no accounting for inflation over the 26 years.
Yep. Thank you.
Any further questions? What's the thoughts of the body? Ms. Brendan?
I make a motion to approve resolution number E 2019-012 to modify the contract for private development for TIFs number 19 for the Riverfront redevelopment. to now include 3 additional parcels, including acquisition costs for those properties, creating a project that includes the entire block.
Seconded by Member Mars. Any further questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Passes 4-1. All right, thank you. We're on to our next item, 4B, interfund loan resolution for short-term loan to the EDA to fund property acquisitions. Mr. Kursky.
Mr. President, board members, it was anticipated that we'd be further along on this project. Time has passed quickly, or projects have moved slowly. I'm not sure which is the case. So the good news is Dog Eat Deuce is under construction. They actually had their footing inspection today and will be putting up panels next week. They expect occupancy sometime probably late November. They have basically been holding up the project because the developer's lender nor us want to take possession of the property with them still there. It creates a new relocation cost for the developer, and their lender is not really too excited about that. So what we've worked out with them is that you, through the city, would advance the money to acquire the remaining 2 properties. They would pay us back with interest at their construction note closing, and then roll that separately, however they do it, into their TIF note. So we have the contracts that were approved by the EDA, we have to close by Friday on the corner house, and I think it's late August, early September on the other house. And so we almost got the entire block acquired in discussions with our various attorneys and Baker Tilly. It was thought this was the easiest way, and plus we get 4% on our money, which is not what we're getting right now.
Questions of staff? Mr. Lehman.
This says that the $500,000 loan is coming from the city's general fund. Do we have an excess $500,000 that we don't need in the general fund?
Mr. President, board members, Darren's not here tonight, but because of some robust building permit revenue right now, we're pretty healthy on the general fund on the building permit side. Again, this is a very short-term loan. We anticipate that depending on what our winter's like, they will either begin the demolition and the garbage removal during the winter if the winter's not that severe. If we get a ton of snow like we did last year, they'll do it in the spring and pay us back. But we're talking 6, 7, 8 months maximum. This is a very short, as in discussions with Mr. Nelson, this is no different than a short-term investment we'd use for the general fund. And at 4%, that's better than we're getting in any of our investments right now.
4% with a deadline of April 1st, 2020, less than a year.
5 if it goes May 31st.
And then, you're right, and then you get a kicker if it extends, so, all right. Good question.
Any other questions? How would the board like to proceed? Member Brennan.
I make a motion to approve resolution number E 2019-011, approving an interfund loan to advance costs associated with the acquisition relocation costs for 2 properties in the Riverfront Bluff redevelopment TIF District number 19.
Contreras seconds. Any other discussion? Discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Passes 4-1. We are on to item 4C, purchase of 116 Atwood Street. Mr. Kursky.
Mr. President, board members, we did have this before you before. However, as we again talked, there's been a fair long passage of time on this property, and the value of it went up, as many properties have in Shakopee. And I think we had pretty clear direction early on that if someone was going to be selling, that we would try and be as fair as we could to them and not force anyone out. I think that this is a pretty equitable arrangement. It's, I think, appraised value today is about $206,000. The owners agreed at $200,000. They have signed this contract, and we are scheduled to close.
So we better hurry. No. Any questions of staff? Ms. Contreras.
I'd like to make a motion to approve resolution number E 2019-009, authorizing the purchase of the property located at 116 Atwood Street for the amount of $200,000 and $25,000 in relocation payment.
We have a motion and a second on the floor by Member Brennan. Any further discussion? Discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And opposed?
Aye.
It passes 4-1. Item 4D, facade improvement loan. Mr. Kursky.
Mr. President, board members, we haven't seen one of these for a while. This is an application for a facade improvement loan. It's requesting $28,650 for 205 Lewis Street, either requesting funds for new windows, new awnings, new exterior signage on this eligible building downtown. This is the preliminary drawing that they have submitted. Basically, they're adding, you'll see we have some photographs in a second, but they're adding some additional storefront and work on this building. They've been able to get some new tenants, and they want better access and visibility actually from the sidewalk. This is the building today. This is the area where they'll be taking all the brick out and putting a storefront with a door in. These are some other views of the building. So this is a major area of impact. They will be getting rid of all of these signs in the building and going to one sign over here in the corner. So they requested $28,650, which is 50% of the improvement costs. They had two estimates, one for $83,000, one for $76,500. Staff is recommending an award of the $28,650 with a 5-year term.
Questions of staff? Mr. Lehman.
2 questions, Mr. Chair. Has this property received a facade improvement loan within the last 10 years?
No, sir.
Okay, second one is, in his information, it says something about 2 different kind of awnings, an A-style awning and barrel awning. What does that mean?
So, Mr. President, board members, a barrel awning sounds just like it looks. It goes round, and a awning goes like that.
Okay.
Style of awning.
Basically, correct.
And I was looking at the pictures of the current site, and I think that one there is an A-style?
This is currently a weather-protected entrance. It's not really an
Okay.
awning. There aren't any real awnings on this
Okay.
building at all. So it's,
Do we have any kind of picture of what that might look like when it's got 2 different kinds on there?
I believe, just in the elevation that they provided us, this is, looks like an A awning. So you can see it has, the difference is if it was a barrel, this would be one straight line, and an A awning, you have a leading edge. So you can see on here, this is a A-frame awning. And I believe the applicant's contractor is here. Can answer any questions on the
River
construction
City
side.
Center has A awnings.
So a good example would be
It's like that.
Arnie's has a barrel awning. The Soup Ladies building has an A-frame awning. So one has a angle, the other is round.
Just a comment, I think we can agree that an awning, either style, would make that building,
Well, I think they're gonna
Look
have
much
both
better.
on the building.
oh, well, either way,
I'm
I
trying to
think,
figure out how they work together.
So I think, council member, if you look at this rendering here, so right now there's that brown glass entranceway right here. That's going to be eliminated, and they're going to have a barrel vault awning that will come out in this area and cover the entrance so you don't get rain or snow in it. And so I think it'll be, that's where they're showing the 205 right here with the 2 doors.
I see.
Those doors are actually back here. They're not up at the street level.
Well, it's gonna look pretty nice.
any other questions of staff?
And the
I have a-
applicant has their contractor here.
Okay, we can bring them, I have one question to staff. What is the balance in our loan program currently?
I asked Mr. Nelson that, but he's not here. It's well over
I
$150,000.
thought it was pretty flush, yeah. Would the contractor like to comment on this project here?
I am Wade Johnson with Amcon Construction. I live at 2547 Onyx Drive in Shakopee. And I don't have anything specifically to say, but if you have any questions, I'd certainly do my best to answer them.
Mr. Lehman?
How did he do on the awning explanation?
I think he did quite well, Mayor and Councilor Matt. The barrel is the one in the center you see with the address numbers on it. So.
Any other questions? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mars?
Mr. President, I'll offer a facade improvement loan request for the 205 Lewis Street not to exceed $28,650.
Mr. Lehman.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the facade improvement loan. Any other discussion? Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. 5-1. We got one. All right. We are on to the EDA bill list for your perusal. Is there any questions on the EDA bill list? Seeing none, we're on to item 6, adjourned to September 3rd. Do we have a motion? Mr. Lehman?
Motion to adjourn to September 3rd.
September 3rd.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
We will call this City of Shakopee City Council meeting back to order for August 7th, 2019. We are on item number 10A1, PUD, a concept review proposal for Slumberland Development. And Michael, welcome back.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. So this is under the new PUD concept review. So if you remember when you adopted that ordinance, any new PUD coming forward requires a concept review at both the Planning Commission and the City Council before they can actually submit a formal application. So that's where we are here tonight. This is allow you to see kind of scope, get initial reaction from comments from staff, and provide some early input to the developer before they spend a lot of money and then come back and gets denied. So this is the site we're looking at. This is Highway 169. This is basically part of the Hauer Farm. You've got Clarney Hills over here. This is an existing city park that you'll see as part of this project. Staff would recommend that park dedication money that comes out of this project go to improving that into a neighborhood park, because right now it's basically just a grass field. So this was the concept plan that was presented to the Planning Commission. Connects all of the streets per the agreements that were made with the county. Boulevard of the Main Street coming in here. Townhouses across the back, and then split between two types of single-family lots, and then an apartment complex over here. This was a updated plan that we received, I believe, yesterday that eliminates a few houses over here for some additional stormwater and buffer between this existing single-family neighborhood and the apartment building, and a little bit different kind of layout concept for the apartment building. In a PUD, they meet the underlying zoning for density and the comp plan requirements. Up top, you'll see they're proposing two single-family types, a 50-foot wide single-family lot with a garage here, and then a wider with probably a 3-car garage on this 60-foot lot. So these are slightly smaller than we typically allow at the 50-foot level. And then typical townhome lots would run across the back here. They have included, as part of their concept, a pretty significant trail system throughout the project. As you remember, trails are pretty important in this community. So they would be developing some stormwater basins under the power lines. I think if you look at the aerial, you can see through here, this is all Xcel Energy power lines in this area. And you've got some MnDOT stormwater basins here. They're basically turning that area into a more naturalized area, along with a pretty extensive trail system that actually comes back up here and hooks back into the existing neighborhood. The only connection made to that existing neighborhood is a one-street connection right here. And again, there is a trail connection from the apartment building back into the neighborhood. So from a pedestrian standpoint, it's pretty connected. There would be sidewalks on at least one side of the street. You can see on the townhouse side, there are sidewalks proposed. There are some issues that we found on just looking at it. These three particular houses are over the natural gas easement, so this will have to be modified moving forward. And I believe we also have, you can see the power line, I think, a lot better here. So that area is basically not buildable. but will be used for more public amenities in the stormwater ponds. And I think you saw some comments in your report from the Planning Commission and from staff on the engineering side. There is a Met Council sewer back here. The city engineer might be able to talk a little bit about that, but it's not our sewer, and we're not sure what the capacity is. If that's a transmission line, if necessary, they can connect across to the city sewer on the other side over by Canterbury. So there's no, I saw some traffic, there is no sewer capacity issue in this area. It happens to be that we happen to own the transmission line that happens to run behind the property.
I believe that's the interceptor.
Thank you.
Right?
Yeah, no, I thank you for that comment. Some of us have been contacted here by a resident in the community and said, oh, this development, it has a capacity problem, and it's not. This area has all been factored into capacity. It's how and where you hook up to it. Is that correct?
Mayor and Council, that's correct, and the city engineer can chime in, but basically we have a network here, both from a water and a sewage side. Spuck's already brought a water line that's hydranted over in the corner. They'll have to loop that through, but it loops to the other side of the freeway already, so there's water capacity. The same is true. Everyone knew this site would develop at some point, so the infrastructure's been installed around it.
Steve, comment on this, and then we'll.
Mayor and council members, so this site, approximately the easterly 3/4 of it, was actually planned to go to a city sanitary sewer that's already stubbed out for this entire area. This city sanitary sewer is stubbed out on Canterbury Road in the northwest quadrant of Canterbury Road and 17th Avenue. But since those parcels in between this development and Canterbury Road aren't developed yet, we approached Met Council to see if we could connect directly into their interceptor line. If that's not possible, we'll have to stick with the original plan of going into the city sanitary sewer. That's, again, already stubbed out for this area.
Right, all set to go, so might be a cost issue for the developer, absolutely. Counselor Lehman?
You know, this question always pops up and I don't recall the answer. Maybe somebody can jog my memory, but the Shakopee-Chaska interceptor, back then, we bought extra capacity in that. And I don't know what we have remaining of that capacity, and I don't know how we find out. And maybe somebody gave us that answer and I just don't recall, but.
Steve?
Mayor and council members, in our capital improvement plan, we actually have a placeholder for that additional capacity, and it's at 3 different levels depending on the capacity that we exceed. So that is all planned out, but that capacity built into that interceptor line is not for these parcels in this development. It's actually for the parcels to the west, in the Windermere, westerly and southerly area for that. So that capacity, again, is not for this section of the interceptor line.
But when the Met Council did the interceptor years before 1996, I mean, they were looking at more of a fuller build-out for our community and trying to phase that capacity in for us. So I think this is more of a where are you going to hook up issue than a capacity problem.
Mayor and Council, this is not a capacity issue. This is,
Okay.
whose
And I'm
line are you hooking into?
Right, and I'm trying to clarify that.
Well,
Counselor Lehman?
but even if you hooked into the city's one that's stubbed out for this, that additional capacity is already worked into the overall capacity.
Yes.
So I get it. My next question would be, I was looking at some side yard setbacks. Was it 5 feet? 50-foot lots of 5 foot versus 10-foot side setbacks of 5 foot.
So Mayor and Council, again, this is a PUD, so you have flexibility. In order to get the flexibility, they have to give something back. So what they have to give back is open space, more public improvements, better landscaping, more street trees, better design of the product. Those are things we can't tell right now because, again, we're at a concept stage. You'll see later tonight, single-family design standards where we're looking at shrinking that side yard setback. We've been giving variances left and right on projects because people want bigger houses now in smaller yards. Typically in more urbanized areas, you see 5 foot, it's pretty standard, because then it's really 10 feet, which meets the building code. So you're 5 feet from the property line on each side, which is 10 feet. The building code requires that separation, otherwise it has to be fireproof. So even see some houses, the soffits, they're doing out of fiber cement or something to prevent any updraft if there were a fire in the adjacent building. But we're seeing this more and more because they're trying to basically drive down somewhat the cost or keep the housing at least somewhat affordable.
Government regulations get in the way. I had the same concern on setbacks. I know that, 5 and 5. And I know we may have that in our older part of Shakopee, but, I know in the past we've done 5 and 10 instead of 10 and 10. And
Mayor and
that-
Council, we've been doing 7 and 7.
Equal split.
Yep.
I know in the past we've done 5 and 10, and it gives that look and appearance of, one is closer, but the other one, and so a total of 15.
And Mayor and Council, we're seeing other cities where they're actually at 0 and the next house is at 10. So that on one side of the property, it's right on the property line, and on the other side, it's 10 feet. So you don't have a side yard on one side, but you have a bigger side yard on the other.
Councilor Whiting, I'll come back.
Well, thank you. Since this is kind of a review and design process, some of the concerns I would have, we talked a little bit about the setbacks, and that would be a concern. The lot size is tighter, but I think there's opportunity in this. I don't have a big problem with the lot size issues here. I think we need some of that. What I do have a concern about is whether or not these would be private roads or public roads.
These are all city streets.
They'd have to be city streets. Perfect. And then we mentioned a little bit about the design standards. I think we would need to require the design standards to be held up to last the test of time, I guess, and some of those concerns.
Mayor and Council, I think we heard through the community survey and also through the comprehensive plan that kind of what we call snout houses or garage door neighborhoods are not as popular as they once were. People want the ability to see. I think studies are shown that if you don't have a front door forward, it's not as safe because you can't see who's out in your driveway or in your street. So that's one of the things that Mr. Soboto will be talking about from the design standard standpoint. These would have to exceed whatever standards you all adopt. These would have to exceed it since it's a PUD.
And then the final concern, I think since it is a PUD, I think we should, as a city, retain the right to name the roads. I think that's important to a lot of our historic people in town that want to get some of those names that haven't been out there. And since it is a give and take, I think that's where I'd like to see it.
And Mayor and Council, it's not been done before, but under the new PUD regulations, you would be allowed to do that.
Other questions of staff? Councilor Brennan?
What is, on this design, what is the assumption that the main route out and in of the area would be? Because personally, I would go through the current Killarney Hills area, just because it'd be a quicker route down to,
Maybe this way.
that's just how I would do it. But I don't know if that's the assumption that most of the people be driving through Killarney Hills, or is it out to 17th Avenue?
Mayor and Council, the design is really focused towards 17th Avenue. I mean, I think from a public safety standpoint and accessing the park where you have one access point, that's not a great access point, and the city engineer can talk about it when it comes down to Eagle Creek, because you're just past and you're under the bridge there. So we've seen a lot of designs over the years for the site. A lot of them use that as kind of their main access point. This project really is using all of the existing streets that are off of 17th Avenue, which the county, when they redesigned that road before, they figured in all these access points already, so they've taken advantage of all of them.
Right.
So that the apartment's actually a full access to the west, and then a right in, right out on the east side of it. And that was one of the agreements with Scott County.
Okay. I have one more question.
Continue, yes.
On the townhomes, do you know if the townhomes can be seen from 169? Because I wouldn't want a wall of townhomes with the same look on the backside of.
Again, Mayor and Council, It's a PUD, you're gonna have a lot of say in the design, and we hear you. I think we don't want it to look like a wall of barracks along 169, and so I think one of the requirements as this moves forward is you're gonna have some control of the architecture, and you could ask for a mixture of 2 and 3 story or 1 story, and I mean, it's really up to you all. Again, this is just purely a concept layout. You have a lot of latitude.
More?
No.
Counselor Lehman was in line next.
Go ahead.
I like the road layout. I like the fact that they're connecting up to all the existing developments and connecting to multiple access points to 17th Avenue. Does the 5-yard side yard setback apply in a 60-foot lots also?
Mayor and Councilor I believe that is the same. It's 5 feet on the 60 and the 50s. But the
Okay.
developer's here and they can address kind of the
Throughout
specifics.
the
Throughout
development.
I would prefer a 7.5 instead.
On the 50s or the 60s?
Both. The next question I have is, and I agree with the no monotony clause along 169 on the townhouses, but I think that's pretty easy to break up just in what you put on the exterior. The apartment on the corner, you've got 2 access points to 17th Avenue, if I'm reading this correct?
So Mayor and Council, this is the already installed access point to the future gravel pit development right across the street. The county wanted the full access point there. That's why it kind of comes up and goes back in. This is a right in, right out only down here.
Okay, and then, your picture's different than mine.
Yeah,
They
changed
need a
it, yeah.
change.
Changed it before.
Okay, I was gonna ask on my map why this comes down and doesn't connect to anything, but it does here, but it continues on, and so your map is different than my map.
Mayor and Council, this is the
Slight-
drawing we received with some slight changes to the houses here and I think a bigger buffer up against Clarney Hills. So we wanted to give you the latest and greatest that we had just received.
More?
No,
Counselor Whiting?
I wanted to jump on to the highway view conversation about the no monotony. I like that idea, but is there an opportunity to do some berming there or some trees along that too?
Mayor and Council, I think the issue is going to be the very large, and you can see it better in this drawing, you can see the huge
Or power lines?
Xcel Energy power easement that runs through the back here, so.
Yeah, that can't be good, yeah.
And this is, it does have some higher topography, especially moving from the west to the east, so it grades up a little bit here. It is farther away from 169 than some other locations in our community. Now you put a townhome on top of that, and the visibility might increase, but I think when you're driving east on 169 and at this location, obviously your eyes are straight ahead on the road, but that over off the side there, if you visually think about it, it's kind of up, it grades up because Clenary Hills is kind of on top of but.
And Mayor and Council, you've got a pretty big, because of their retention pond here, it's set back pretty far from the
Right.
road.
Oh, just, sorry, thank
Yeah.
you.
Counselor Contreras?
Thank you. Just to continue on with the design, just because they are a PUD, I'd like to just verify, and as we do work along, or make sure that we do get good materials and that they do last, the time that they're supposed to. The quality of life of the buildings. That's it.
I have a couple questions, and so we have seen at least one, if not two, other developments come forward on at least a hunk of this property in the past, and I think both were big apartment buildings. My concern is the traffic and the curve in 17th Avenue. Coming up the grade, going west on 17, right to the apex of the road there, and then that's gonna be a full interchange of, do we anticipate a light there?
Mayor and Council, you speaking up where the,
Yep,
I think it'll depend on what the traffic study shows and what warrants are and what gets developed across the street. I don't think signals are not predictable.
and then continuing west on 17th, the access points, is there a light gonna be there?
Mayor and council, again, lights and stop signs are dictated by traffic warrants. Again, this will require an EAW, so they'll have to do a pretty significant environmental study of this site, including traffic, stormwater, and all the other elements that are required in that. And that'll come to you and then be forwarded to the EQB.
The environmental assessment worksheet, a requirement because of the size
Mayor and council, that's correct, yes.
by the acreage?
Yep.
Yep.
And the total number of units with a 300-unit apartment plus all these single-family, it
Okay.
tips the scales.
Then, my other question involves that we'll have connectivity to the neighborhood to the west?
Mayor and council, that's correct. I mean, I think one of the things that we were pretty pleased about, there are no cul-de-sacs in this project, so there's actually connectivity throughout the neighborhood and to the existing neighborhoods, which I don't think we've seen in a long time.
And then my last question, going to the east of the apartment buildings, the north entrance or the north stub there, if that piece just to the east of it is commercial, would there be a connector street?
So Mayor and council, this is designed so that they'll build the, working with this property owner, that's a requirement. This will be their main drive into this piece of property. So this will mean that be the main point of access for both the commercial property and the apartment building.
No, but on that north-south access, right there,
Yeah.
would that road connect to the commercial piece in the future? Yeah, right?
Yeah, that'll be their access. They may have somewhere down, we don't know, the potential for a right-in or something, but it really will depend on what that design looks like, and this developer does not have that property.
My last question is in regard to parks. We've just completed or working on the final parts of a master park plan, facilities, trails. Big piece here, trying to use Kalari Hills, which I appreciate, and that gets developed for this neighborhood and the old neighborhood there. No other parks within in the development?
Mayor and council, that's correct. There will be trails and connections to trails, but if you remember, there are parks over here.
Yeah, no.
And so when this also develops at some point in the near future, there's going to be their parks. I think one of the things the study found is that these kind of parks just flat without programming and proper design fail. And so this will give us an opportunity to really make this kind of a new style neighborhood park.
More, Counselor Lehman?
No, it's just a concept overview, so I actually like this plan better than the previous plan on the same parcel, for a lot of different reasons. Not only does all the roads connect up and give you multiple inputs and outputs to the property, but you're not adding connections to 17th Avenue, you're using a lot of existing, at least to the western portion. My only issue would be the side yard setback size.
You know, this is a great opportunity for the developer and staff to learn about the issues just on a overview aspect, and that's the value of this. We're not approving any plans today. Does the applicant want to come forward and make comments on their concept plan? Please state your name and address to the record, and welcome.
Gary
to our
Wolfschlager
community.
with the Summergate Development. We're located at 17305 Cedar Avenue South in Lakeville, Minnesota. We put a lot of work in this, trying to make this the best we could for the community. Nowadays, people are looking for smaller homes. You know, there's a great demand out there for villa homes, as we call them, all right? And so that's the reason for the 50-foot lots. The 60-foot lots meet your standard width and stuff, so we see that the similar homes that are going in now in the community on a standard lot would be going in there. By having the smaller lots, it helps keep the price down. We're hoping to come in to this area and try to keep some of the housing under 400,000, which is hard to do nowadays. So that's our approach to it, you know. We're willing to work with staff and work out all the difficulties that's still to be addressed here. But I think once we get the AEW done, that'll tell us a lot about the transportation and stuff. So we appreciated your time here tonight just discussing it. It helps us see what you're thinking about. And so we will, in the future, try to keep it posted. And if there's any other questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Well, Mr. Walschlager, so the housing costs, I mean, the sweet spot's about 250, 275. I don't know if that's reality. Maybe you paid too much for the land. No, I'm just kidding.
What do you think? I don't think Gene thinks that, so. Well, it's with the cost of water, with the SPUC's costs involved, with the utility costs, and with the infrastructure nowadays, the cost has gone up drastically. This year alone, on concrete pipe, sewer pipes, stormwater pipes and stuff like that is up about 50% from where it was a year ago. So there's lots of things to get around it, but it's pretty hard to develop any lot and build a, 350 to 400 is about as cheap as you can get in building nowadays because of the cost of materials and stuff. But our goal is to keep it as low as we can and work with staff here as far as what's got to go on for siding and stuff, because when you put lap siding all the way around a house, which a lot of people like to see, it increases the price of the house about $15,000 to $20,000. So if we do vinyl siding, let's say on the sides, and put lap and brick and stuff and keep the front of the house looking good, that would bring the cost down on what the end product could be. And we hope when we get to you in front of for a preliminary plat in front of you, that we'll have a builder in lines and builders in line, and we'll have the ability to show you the product that we're going to put on it.
Other questions of the developer on this concept review? Thank you.
Mayor and council, we were just speaking with Mr. Sabota. I mean, the issue with 7.5 on each side is on the 50-foot lots, you end up with a 35-foot wide house with a garage. It ends up being basically a garage.
Yeah.
So I think that if you can give us some flexibility from a design standpoint, we'll have to work with them. There are some narrower house designs we can look at, and also maybe we look at that 0 where you have a bigger setback on one side so people have a bigger yard, but we will work on that.
And again, just to review, you said that their concept of 5 and 5 is throughout the entire proposal, correct?
Mayor and council, that's correct. And so if you go to 15 on the 50-foot lots, you got a 35-foot wide house, and everybody wants at least a 2-car garage. It makes it difficult.
Got to go up and down a lot. Counselor Lehman.
I'm sure staff can look at all options, but you could go with the 7.5 on the 60-foot lots and a 5 and 5 on the 50, and there's some
Yep.
compromise.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, as Mr. Walschlager said, this is just a concept. That's why we're here. And I think the devil's in the details, especially when it comes to these house designs and the townhouse designs. And I think that's where, from a PUD standpoint, you have to approve. To remember, some of these you've done like Lennar, you actually approved, I think, 7 or 8 different type of house models that they could put out there. That was a PUD. you're gonna have that same rights here, so we're gonna have to nail down what houses are going where and what's gonna look like before. That's the whole idea behind getting the relief in a PUD.
More questions of staff or the developer? If not, I hope the developer got some good comments from the council here on your concept review, and we'll see where this all takes us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's move ahead then to 10A2, rezoning of 3 properties for riverfront from B1 to B3. Michael, welcome.
So Mayor and Council, this is basically, these are the 3 properties that the EDA has acquired, the remainder of the block. If you remember, everything else was zoned B3. This is just making the whole block in conformance to the B3 zoning. As they replat this, you can no longer have lots with cross zoning, so everything has to have the same zoning.
Councilor Whiting?
If nobody has any comments, I'd make a motion to approve ordinance number 02019-009, amending the city zoning map to rezone 303 and 313 First Avenue West and 116 Atwood Street North from B1 Highway Business to B3 Central Business District.
Motion on the table?
Second.
Second from Councilor Contreras. Councilor Lehman?
The gray on the map you just had up, is that the corner that was looking at possible being retail?
Hang on, Councilmember, sorry.
Atwood and first?
So, Mayor and Council, right now, the concept plan that we saw has a restaurant. I think it was the same that you all approved last time. They're looking at potentially a new entrance to the apartment building here, surface parking lot here with a garage below, and then this corner will have some sort of retail. They've talked to the fitness operator that they have in one of their projects. Potentially this could be a fitness that would serve both the public and the building, which would be allowed in the B3.
Further questions of staff? There is a motion and a second on the table. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Moving ahead then, 10A3, rezoning of 2 properties from B1 to Highway Business Park. Look at that, Kyle, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Mars, members of the council. Before you this evening is a request for a rezoning. It's initiated by the city of Shakopee to rezone 2 properties in the West Shakopee Gateway Plat from B1 Highway Business to BP Business Park. So here's the site along County Road 69 and 169. It's at the northeast quadrant, just south of Town Square Mall. The site is highlighted in red. It is 2 parcels. 2 parcels that total 17.4 acres. The larger piece is 15.85, and then the smaller piece is 1.55. It's currently zoned B1. Proposed zoning would be business park. In the comprehensive plan, it's guided for mixed employment center. The northern property, which is the smaller property, would be anticipated to be used for parking or required green space as it's a contaminated site. So this is the zoning map of the area. You can see that the newly constructed Veerling Drive runs on the north side. The surrounding properties are zoned B1 Highway Business to the north, R3 to the east, and R1B for townhouses in Stone Meadow to the east, or to the southeast. So reasons for the rezoning, the property and the area is not suited for additional retail and service businesses due to the lack of visibility. We've talked to a number of brokers. The property's currently being marketed, from talking to potential users and also to the real estate broker. They believe that business park zoning would be the most appropriate for this site. And it's an attractive location for headquarters and employment centers with the close interchange access. They don't necessarily need the visibility that the retail and service businesses are looking for. It also would serve as a less intense buffer from the adjacent highways for the adjacent residential uses if you're looking at having potentially some larger buildings and some nicer landscaping. So with the recommendation, the Planning Commission reviewed this at their last meeting and unanimously recommended 6-0 that the City Council approve the proposed rezoning from B1 Highway Business to BP Business Park. And I'll turn it over to the council for questions.
Kyle, thank you. Questions of staff? Counselor Lehman?
Mayor, weren't we talking to somebody about the purchase of some of this land right here?
Michael?
Mayor and council, this is one of the requirements of the purchase agreement that this get rezoned. So this is the last step. They have, she left, but I think they have a couple $100,000 right now in escrow for the closing, and I think this closing has to happen in September, October. But one of the requirements is it had to get rezoned.
That was a mix of.
That's a Opus. Yep.
It was a
They
mix
currently have a
of,
plan for two buildings here that would be office, R&D, kind of manufacturing, warehouse distribution, which would
One of the-
fit the business park.
A question for staff. Moving from the B1 to BP Business Park, one of the net gains is to try to limit the warehouse aspect of this, is that correct?
Mayor and council, correct. If you remember, our agreement with them prohibits basically where warehouse is a dominant use. If you look at our BP uses that we have today, it's Beta C, Shutterfly, Bear. They all have some kind of warehousing, but it's basically stuff comes in one end and goes out the other. So it's more of a manufacturing office kind of blend.
Higher value.
Yep, and I think when we worked with them, you know, you're going to be seeing hopefully in a couple months the commercial design standards. They've already agreed that they'll meet those, which is no more painted concrete, because we've been having some buildings in town you can see haven't gotten repainted, and so we've been working with the commercial development community on doing new projects with integral color concrete. They've agreed to that here already as part of their purchase agreement. And you can see the first building that went up was Universal Stone on Stagecoach is integral color. Doggy Doos is going to be integral color. I think that all but one of the development firms in town is pretty excited about that because it cuts way down on their maintenance, and they can tell their tenants, I'm not painting the building yellow for you. So.
Okay. Last question, at least for me, can we put a welcome sign on the BP area, right? We talked about it a lot, and I don't know on the contaminated spot, but we did talk about it, that this is, gonna be redeveloped, this area, in a new entrance or expanded entrance.
So Mayor and Council, once we close with Opus, hopefully soon, we'll work with them on a site design, and there's a little out parcel there that's in this rezoning that we could put a sign on.
Thank you. Other questions of staff? Counselor Lehman?
Didn't we put Doggy Doos up on the northern part of this on the map? And how does changing to business park affect their use when they're not a business park?
Mayor Mars, Councilor Lehman, if you look at the monitor, the cursor, this is on the Doggy Doo site. That's not proposed for rezoning. It would remain as B1 Highway Business.
So it's just what's outlined in red?
It's just what's outlined in red.
Okay, so when it says two parcels on here, I was looking at it as two.
No,
Yeah,
I
it's
agree with
this
you. This
little,
one is-
this triangle
this
piece
one
here
is-
on the north
I was
side
looking
and the
at
larger
two
piece to the south.
parcels.
Oh, well,
It's the one that's not buildable is the
this,
second.
I like this one with the.
Yep, okay, got it.
Other questions of staff? Other questions of staff? If not, thank you. Counselors? Counselor Brennan?
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 0-2019-008, an ordinance rezoning two properties from B1 Highway Business to BP Business Park.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Contreras. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. 10A4, zoning text amendment for residential design standards. Michael, thank you.
Mayor and Council, Mr. Soboto will be covering this, but again, this came out of a lot of feedback we got through comprehensive plan and from a lot of neighborhood meetings. And then if you remember the community survey, this is one of kind of the design issues that came up. And so Mr. Sabota has researched a lot of other communities, and some communities are over here. We're trying to be kind of more middle of the road. We have worked with the larger home builders. Probably 95% of their, or 96% of their plans meet these requirements today. They just won't build a couple of the other models, but they were pretty receptive to at least kind of setting the bar so they all know where it is. With that, I'll give it to Mr. Sabota. I'll give it to Mr. Reynolds, who raised his hand.
This also takes care of our sidewalk issue that we've been struggling with for some time. It outlines specifically what the requirements are for sidewalks.
On one side or the other, everybody's getting a sidewalk. They're coming back.
And Mayor and Council, we do have an intern on board that's doing a sidewalk survey right now of all the existing neighborhoods where they don't have sidewalks or where they have some sidewalks, and we'll be bringing back to you a sidewalk policy for all the other neighborhoods that are not newer, that are meeting this standard, or we put them in. The other thing we found is I find this hard to believe, but we do not have a standard today for driveways or sidewalks on the property. So we've been already having failures of some driveways, and so we'll also be coming back for an amendment to establish a kind of a reasonable standard for residential driveways and for residential sidewalks, because down the road's ending up with what I'll call early warranty work that's really not necessary.
Councilor Whiting?
I also like the temporary storage addition. Now, a question about the intern doing the sidewalk survey. You make him walk your dogs at the same time? There's interns, you know. Sorry, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
No, I do like the idea of the temporary storage. That's been an issue. 180 days, you know, I think that's well within the reason of a temporary storage. It's a little long, but I think that works too. So I like what you've done with this. Thank you.
Other questions? I gotta appreciate the window one, because I own a house that is two stories tall, and there's definitely one side that does not have a window, and I wish it did, to give me a little more airflow, or at least some light, and thank you.
So Mr. Sabota has got a brief presentation.
Yes.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Before you this evening is a proposed text amendment to 3 chapters of the city code. They're noted on the monitor to general regulations, urban residential zone, and construction materials. You've already talked about a couple of the proposed text amendments. One of them that would be to prohibit temporary carports. The other would be a minor reduction in the setback requirements within the R1B zone. We did talk about some setbacks in the Summerlin Place PUD concept earlier this evening. Also, there'd be an addition of a similar front yard setback standard for structures and infill developments. I'll be going over these individual items in the presentations, but this is just an outline. An addition of a window coverage requirement, an addition of a maximum garage protrusion standard, and I'll be going over what that means, and a cap on accessory structure square footage for lots less than 10 acres in the agricultural and the rural residential zone. So for temporary carports, the building code defines temporary structure as a structure that's used less than 180 days. That's difficult to enforce. If someone puts up the temporary structure for 180 days, takes it down for a week, puts it back up again, the code isn't exactly clear on what happens in those situations. We get complaints about setbacks of these structures, also the appearance of them, the materials. They're temporary in nature. They're not made for permanent use. Commonly, we see these used permanently, and so tracking the exact time that they were installed and or if they get removed is a difficult thing. And also for aesthetics, it's a concern that we've heard about in the community survey, also from residents that we receive complaints from. And they also don't receive building permits. A lot of times they don't meet setbacks, or if they don't have if they're not on a driveway, they're in the front yard. Currently, the city code is silent on these, on the use of these structures. Many cities have regulations, specific regulations for these. In the proposed text amendment, it would prohibit the use of these temporary structures and require removal by May 1st. Now, the council, we can certainly discuss that, but the draft code would be to require removal by May 1st, 2020, which is greater than 180 days from today. So setback adjustments. Current R1B setbacks are front and rear of 30 feet, and the side setback of 10 feet and a street side setback of 20 feet. Street side setbacks are corner lots. It's for the side street frontage on a corner lot where it would be 20 feet. The proposed setbacks would be 25 for the front, 30 for the rear, 7.5 on the side, and 15 feet for a street side. Now, there's also an addition of front yard setback standard for infill development. I've got an aerial photo on the side of the slide here that we can discuss. I can show you there's a site you may be familiar with. There was a home that was constructed last year on a site on Eagle Creek Boulevard. These are homes across from the Addison Apartments. They're existing single-family homes. They're set back. Get the cursor. They're set back. The existing homes are set back 100 to 110 feet. They're zoned to R1B. The minimum setback in R1B is 30 feet. There was a new home that was constructed on this lot here that my cursor is on. It was constructed at 55 feet, but considering it's 50 feet closer than the adjacent homes, it appears that it's in their front yard. We received a few complaints about that. In looking at regulations, we drafted a regulation to require a standard for infill on a lot that they would be constructed at either in a range of 80% to 120% of the existing setback of the existing structures on the lot if there's 3 structures or more. So that would require, in this case, the home to be set back at least 80. If the setback is 100 feet, it would have to be at least 100, but no more than 120. So it would allow some flexibility to match the requirements of the surrounding houses. So that's what that means. Window coverage requirements. Currently, there's in the city code, there's no current requirement for windows on residential structures except for bedrooms to meet the building code, but as far as the zoning ordinance, there's no requirement. This proposal would break up blank walls of siding with windows and trim pieces and provide natural light and ventilation. A lot of times we end up seeing single-family homes where there's no windows on 2 sides and the house almost acts as an interior townhouse unit without having windows on 2 sides. So it's based off of a percentage of the facade. Facades facing a street or a private drive would be 10%. Street side for a corner lot would be 5%, and all other sides of the house would be 5%. Windows in the doors and garage doors would count towards that. With our online plan review software that we use for reviewing building permits, figuring these calculations is very simple. We can do the calculation in less than a minute very easily on the plans that we receive. So there's just an example photo of a 2-story house with no windows on the side facing a street. That's a corner lot. None of the photos in this area are actually or in the slideshow are of houses in Shakopee. These are actually in other communities. So this is another couple facades where there's no windows. The goal would be to have some window frontage, and having a 5% requirement would be something that staff looks at as reasonable. So the next amendment would be an addition of a garage protrusion limit. The goal would be to limit the prominence of garages and garage doors to the house facades when you're driving down the street. These are a couple views from streets in other communities where the most prominent feature is garage doors and you don't see much of the house. As Mr. Kursky mentioned earlier in a presentation, there's concerns about eyes on the sidewalk. You hear a lot about packages being stolen off of doorsteps. If your garage is way out front, you're missing 50% of the view of the street if it blocks your view there. So the draft amendment that's in the city code allows the protrusion of a garage from the front facade based on 50% of the width of the living space up to 14 feet. So I've got a diagram that shows that and explains that. A covered porch would be allowed, provided the porch is at least 5 feet deep and 10 feet wide, and that would count as part of the front facade. And living space above a garage within 4 feet of the front building line would count as well. So a bonus room above a garage would meet the requirements. And there's a provision for allowance of side loading garages where a side loading garage, then that design would have the garage pushed out in front of the house. With certain requirements, side loading garages would be permitted with window frontage and the amount of brick or stone. That's a requirement that's in the draft ordinance. This is another photograph of a neighborhood in Lakeville where the garages are the most prominent. And this isn't it may look like it's an alley, but that's an actual street. So this is a diagram explaining the garage protrusion. So you can see in the figure on the left, you've got a 10-foot wide living space on the front facade and a 20-foot wide garage. And with 50% of the living space, the maximum protrusion would be 5 feet, which would be half of the 10 feet. Then in the figure in the middle, you'd have a covered porch that's 5 feet by 14 feet, and the maximum protrusion would be 7 feet. So the more living space you have, the more protrusion you can have, up to a maximum of 14 feet. Now, when we were drafting these standards, as staff, we drove around, looked at neighborhoods in Shakopee, looked at individual house plans. We reviewed what plans we thought were good aesthetics, and we looked at the actual dimensions of them in the different neighborhoods, and we went back and figured out, and that's how we came up with these dimensions. And then the figure on the right would show that you've got a 32-foot wide garage and a 32-foot wide facade. But your maximum would still be 14 feet instead of it being 16. So it allows design flexibility based on the different housing designs. And looking at several of the neighborhoods, there are many neighborhoods that meet this standard already. I've got some photographs of houses and what do they look like out in the street. So these are photographs of houses that would meet this requirement. You've got numbers of different house styles represented here, some with front porches, some with living space that meet the front building line, and some of the more traditional 60s and 70s ramblers that we see that are very common in our community. Those would all meet the proposed standard. So this is another photograph here. You've got a number of different houses with the different types of designs, and they would meet that except for the top right photograph. That would not meet that proposed standard. Then the last section would be a maximum square footage standard for accessory structures in the rural, residential, and the agricultural zone. This is one thing that the city of Shakopee is actually differs significantly from Scott County in the townships. Residents of Shakopee could actually build a larger garage than someone in the township could if they're on rural, residential, or agricultural zoned property. We don't have a specific size limit right now. You're limited based on hard surface coverage and the height of your house. So with a 15-foot height requirement, if you had a flat roof, you could make a really large building. At that point, when you get to, it could be 5 times the size of your house. Typically, when we see accessory structures that large, we get into use issues and that they're more commercial in nature versus being residential in nature. Or they're being rented out for storage or other businesses. So those are the concerns. The goal would be to not have the accessory structures be the most prominent feature on the lot and have a retain residential character. So the proposed draft amendment to the zoning code would be to have a 2,400 square foot limit for lots under 10 acres. And the height requirement would stay the same. So we reviewed this text amendment at the Planning Commission at their last meeting, and by a vote of 6-0, they recommended that the City Council approve the proposed amendment, and I'll turn it over to the council for questions.
Kyle, can you back up one? Just the height requirement on an accessory, if my house can be, what, 35 feet tall?
Correct. Mayor Mars, members of the council, the maximum height for residential structures is 35 feet, which is 2.5 stories.
Is that the same in rural residential in the ag zone?
Correct.
So on the height deal, I can have my accessory structure the same height as my house?
Max height is 15 feet. There is an exemption for.
Whichever is less, I read
Yep,
that.
whichever is less, there is an exemption for agricultural buildings. So if you had a functioning farm and you had tractors and equipment that need to be stored or silos, there is an exemption for those structures to exceed that.
Other questions of staff? Counselor Lehman?
Couple. The window requirement. So if somebody wants to build out their own house, can they put a fake window on the side of the house to meet the requirement?
Mayor Mars, Councilor Lehman, yes, that would be allowed.
Okay. And the canopy, I guess I'm not
Covered
understanding.
porch?
No, that thing. I'm questioning why we wouldn't allow that on private property. I understand if they're encroaching on a right-of-way or an easement, that part I get, they need to move it. But if it's on private property, what's our concern?
Concerns are about aesthetics and the condition. A lot of these, snow ends up filling them up and they end up tearing, or they end up, that's complaints that we receive, and they don't qualify it as a permanent structure under the building code.
Well, worst case scenario, it's gonna fall on their vehicle, and it is their vehicle to get damaged, not ours. I don't know why we're that concerned about somebody else's use of their own property. If it's an aesthetic issue, you should tell them it's an aesthetic issue, replace it or fix it. We actually have 2 of these in our Public Works Department, and we're using them year-round.
The Mayor Mars, Councilor Lehman, as far as the ones that we have in the public works yard, those are made with much more durable materials than what we see.
Okay, so what if somebody buys a much more durable brand of this to use for their car storage on their own private property? One that's snow rated,
Under the proposed ordinance, it wouldn't be permitted.
it would not be permitted.
Correct.
And why not?
It wouldn't meet the material standards.
Pardon me?
It would not meet the material standards that are in the draft ordinance.
Does ours meet the requirements?
There were variances that were granted for those structures.
Okay.
So,
I think we're overstepping on what individuals can do on their private property, and I think we're not making a good enough argument to justify it.
Counselor Whiting?
No, I've used these before. We've had them in our neighborhood, still do. And many of them have become shredded, and shards of the parts come blowing into my yard, and they're hanging there and looking in disrepair. I don't have a problem with somebody using this as a temporary, but, as maybe, 30 to 60 days or something, or for an event, like a garage sale or a party or something like that. I think that would be a fine use for them, but to leave it on your property for years and let it go to shreds, that's an issue. I mean, if you're gonna use a carport, build a garage, that's more permanent, that's got the materials that'll withstand it, so I understand the concern.
Counselor Lehman?
I think the issue is if it's shredded up, it's not being maintained, and that's a separate issue to my mind.
But it happens. We see,
Trees fall down, branches fall down, they tumble across into somebody else's property, and it's cut down all the trees, really?
I see it, I agree. I think the original covers get shredded, and those, to replace those is significantly higher from the manufacturer. So you end up going to a Menards and buying a blue tarp. Then that shreds. And then the whole idea that, this is not a permanent solution to your issue, that you need to have a storage situation. And I don't think it's what our community should look like as we move forward as a community. Most of these I see are not maintained.
Well, then they should be cited for not being maintained and being a nuisance, not for having one.
Are we creating more work for
I mean,
our city code enforcement, or?
At what point is government going to say, geez, your car's got too much rust on it, we're not gonna allow it in this neighborhood?
Okay.
You know?
Actually, this is not a code enforcement issue, this is a building enforcement, building official enforcement issue, from the questions I've asked from our code enforcement person.
But you can buy winter-rated structures.
That's possible, but it kind of comes down to, you know, the property values of your neighbors who don't have one of these. You have your right to, you're talking about the right to the property owner that's using it.
Yep.
What about the property owner's rights of the neighbor who doesn't want to have to look at it or is selling their property? So I see both sides of the story.
Other questions of staff? Do you have more of your presentation?
Mayor Mars, my presentation is complete. If you have other questions, let me know.
Counselor?
Kyle, question. So we're just not gonna allow carports at all, period, done? Or will they be allowed for certain time, just to make sure?
Mayor Mars, Councilor Contreras, the proposed amendment would prohibit them, and it would prohibit temporary ones. If they were built out of typical exterior rated materials like treated lumber and asphalt shingles, things like that, you could have a carport or a lean-to. It just wouldn't be able to be fabric, metal tubing, canvas, things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could follow up on that, in the event of a public event or a garage sale or a graduation party, how would we balance that if we prohibit them? Would this, because it's used as a temporary kind of a party event thing, would we allow it in that situation?
Mayor Mars, Councilor Whiting, it'd be pretty clear to staff on whether it's a temporary thing for a graduation party or a wedding or something like that versus storage of vehicles. That's a pretty easy one.
I just want to.
And it is our intent to allow that, obviously.
Okay, thank you.
Counselors, questions of staff? If not, thank you, Kyle, for your presentation. Counselor Whiting?
You know, there's a lot of good meat on this bone here. If we would choose to amend it, that's fine, but we'll start with offering a motion to adopt ordinance number 02019-010, an ordinance amending City Code Section 151.007, General Regulations, 151.034, Urban Residential R1B, and 151.108, Construction Materials. I move its adoption.
I have a motion on the table.
I'll second it.
Second. I have a point of clarification. We received an addition to this proposal, 10A4, the new verbiage that was sent out in email, but there's no changes, right? This is
Mayor Mars, members of the council, there's no changes to the actual content of the ordinance. This was adding a signature page and some details in the findings.
We're just missing pages.
Correct.
Yep.
Yep. None of the content of the ordinance was adjusted.
Okay, got it. Discussion. Motion on the table and a second. Discussion. Counselor Contreras.
Just one quick question. There can be amendments later, right? In case we see something is not what we thought, or can we make changes later? or
Mayor
amend
and
it?
council, this is amending something. We amend these things all the time. So issues come up that I call the unintended consequences of law, and we come back, and I think staff's been pretty good, and when we find an issue, bringing stuff back to you. I think a lot of things you're seeing are issues that are coming to us from the community. So the temporary carports is probably the #1 complaint. I think we get probably one a week because they're not buildings, and we get a really good windstorm like we had a few weeks ago, and guess what? They're in your neighbor's yard because they're not buildings. They're not
Correct.
on a foundation. I think we worked with the home builders that are doing most of the building here and talked about some of the issues and made some compromises. Because I can tell you, originally we had sidewalks on both sides. And so they came back and said, look, we get sidewalk on one side. We want to do that, but two sides creates some construction issues. Could you go with one side? And we were like, fine. I mean, I think this has been an iterative process with the people that have to work with it every day. And I think the 2,400 square foot limit, when we found out in the county you're limited, but not in the city, and I can't tell you the number of BOA cases we've seen, and in fact, you all saw one that appealed and you upheld the BOA. You've got people with a 2,000 square foot house with like 8 or 10,000 square feet of buildings, and now they're running a boat shop, and you know, the neighbors are like, look, I didn't move into this kind of agricultural setting to have someone doing boat repair and, you know, lawn machine business in the middle of the night. And so I think we've heard from an entire neighborhood how upset they were, so that's why that got included in here. So these are things we've been hearing about on a regular basis.
Thank you.
All right, more discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you all. Let's move ahead then to 10A5 inter-fund loan resolution for short-term loan to the EDA to fund the property acquisitions. Michael?
Mayor and council, this is the city side, so the EDA, you all approved that. This is the city side to transfer the funds over from the general fund to the EDA, which the EDA has accepted.
Okay, so this is the 500,000.
Yep.
At 4%, short-term, till April 1st or May, it goes up to 5%. And this gets to Mr. Lehman's question about having the money come out of the general fund. Counselor,
Can I make a motion?
if there's questions of staff, we've kind of seen the EDA portion of it, but go ahead. Counselor Brennan.
Make a motion to approve resolution number R2019-079 for an interfund loan to the Shakopee EDA for payment of certain costs for property acquisition and relocation, with reimbursement of these funds to be paid by the developer at their construction development loan closing.
Thank you. I have a motion on the table, second by Counselor Contreras. Further discussion? Discussion? Discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you very much. 10A6, adoption of a Green Step program. Michael, welcome back.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. So this is a program that you'll see is currently in about 125 cities in Minnesota. Actually came to attention courtesy of the city administrator about 6 or 7 months ago. And so a bunch of our staff got interested and worked through this. So it's an action plan proven with Minnesota's best practices. So this is a state of Minnesota sponsored program. It's voluntary. It was created in Minnesota for specifically Minnesota cities. Currently 124 cities enrolled. In your staff summary, we pointed out some of the cities around us. How do you become a Green Step city? Well, the first step is you potentially approve this resolution, but it deals with building and lighting, land use, transportation, environmental management, and resilient economic and community development. And they have established 29 best practices. So here's a good example, attainable areas we've already done in Shakopee. So LED street lighting, we worked with SPUC on our new LED street lights. So the projection is about a 42% reduction in energy usage. And if anyone, I had this discussion with our intern today, so power today is a critical thing, so we're not building new power plants because they become so expensive. So the power companies are actually incentivizing customers, cities to cut down on their power usage because the more power available, they can give it to businesses and industries. So here's a really good example of reducing power usage in the streetlights. So land use, we've already got incorporated to Envision Shakopee. A lot of the land use requirements I mentioned that we're currently working on a sidewalk plan. Tonight you just adopted the sidewalk requirement for new subdivisions. This is modeled off of other plans in the region, so Eden Prairie has a very similar plan. So we're already kind of doing a lot of these things. In the Twin Cities, conversion of city fleets to alternative fuel and/or electric vehicles is becoming more cost obtainable. Here's a really good example. Ford just came out with a 2020 Police Interceptor with a hybrid EV all-wheel drive. So this is their example. The regular gas ones that we're buying at 17 miles to a gallon, they're projecting the new ones get 24 miles to a gallon. The reason why is when they're idling, they're actually running off the batteries. Batteries recharge while they're driving. So it's a self, they don't have to plug them in. And so the projection is a payback on these. We'll see how accurate it is. They're projecting it's a year. I bet it's more like 18 months to 2 years, but it pays back pretty quickly. We keep these vehicles a long time. So the long term energy savings to the city and cost to the city would be pretty substantial. And then the environmental management comes down to parks and trails, increasing the city's green infrastructure. That's a tenet of the Parks, Trails, and Recreation Master Plan. Increasing our urban canopy. You'll see in the CIP that we're using some of our tree fund money that we've acquired from developers for cutting down trees. The ordinance requires those trees have to go back into the public realm, so we'll have a pretty big canopy replacement, and then increasing green infrastructure. You'll see you all adopted new landscape standards that actually do that, and you'll see in some of the park proposals, particularly in the trails, we'll be using green infrastructure. And then renewable energy, we have a pretty large renewable energy plant here already in Shakopee at the Blue Lake facility, but also increases the amount of municipal energy from renewable sources. Spuck's already doing that, and removes barriers for renewable energy for residents, local businesses, and regional industry. We're going to look at the zoning code for that. So why join? As a Green Step City, Shakopee gains access to economic savings from some of these initiatives, partnership with industry-leading experts in sustainability. So as part of those 124 cities, they've all done a lot. Some of the cities are at step 5. They know it works and doesn't work. There's also additional funding that's available as a Green Step City through both the state and federal government that we would have access to. And then it's another, we get to be recognized as one of the green steps. So the other big benefits are cost savings from reduced things like fuel consumption in vehicles, positive health outcomes, and then community engagement. Happy to answer any questions.
Counselor Whiting?
You mentioned the Blue Lake solar facility. Would the Coda Energy plant also fall within that?
Yes,
That we
sir.
could also
So
count?
if any of you have seen the video that Jen Burrington did, it's pretty amazing. That facility actually not only powers RAR, but puts energy back into the Xcel Energy system. So the Coda Energy facility actually creates energy to run itself, creates the energy to run RAR, and anything left over goes back into the grid. So that's another really good example that we probably should have mentioned. So we're already doing a lot of these things. I think by being a Green Step City, it'll open up some additional funding. And I think when you all look at things like vehicles in the future, if, for instance, the Ford Police hybrid electric vehicle actually proves out and actually does have that savings, and they're going to have some out in the market. The most interesting thing is that they're faster than the...
See, that's what the police would want to ask. They want to know that. But, well, sustainability and green jobs and green concepts are the buzzword in industry and commerce right now. And you know, you can talk about the global warming effects, but it just makes sense to do a lot of these projects. And it's
I think the thing the administrator pointed out, it's smart money. I mean, as a city with limited resources, I mean, we should get maybe the next budget cycle a couple of those police vehicles and see whether they really tone out to be what Ford is claiming. Because if they do, since once the police department's done with them, they roll back into our fleet for building inspectors and everyone else, that long-term is a huge fuel savings, not just at what Ford looked at was the typical 2 to 3 year lifespan in the police fleet. I mean, we keep those vehicles for several 100,000 miles. And I think they recognize, you know, battery technology, if you all remember, showing my age here, but Moore's Law, computer chips every few years doubled in capacity. The same thing's happening in batteries.
Up now, I think it's more than 2 years or less. But yeah.
But I think in batteries, we're having the same thing. Every couple of years, the technology is improving significantly. And so a couple of the cities, you know, Xcel and a couple of the other larger power companies, when I was in Greenville, Duke Energy rolled out just in the downtown area 50 charging stations. And you'd be surprised to see how many people will buy an electric car if they have a place to plug them in and they're not paying for that energy. But it was a way to basically cut down. That's a demand that basically is free during the daytime, and that's why they were able to do it at night. When you go home and you power up again, that's when they don't have the power capacity. And they'd rather have you charging those cars during the day.
Mr. Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I found out about the Green Step program. I first heard about it approximately a year and a half, 2 years ago. Really wasn't interested, frankly. And then I started checking into it during one of the conferences about 6 to 8 months ago. And in talking with other city managers and city administrators, it became very clear that this is an opportunity for us to take a look at some efficiencies and, even more importantly, have more grant money available in the future to make things happen. I think it's a great program. I was not interested at all initially, to be absolutely honest with you. And then once I got past some of my preconceived notions, I recognized the value that it brought forward. I used to be the city administrator in another city, and we had the 15th largest municipal gas company. And the reason I mention that, because at the time, we also had a bunch of garbage trucks that were run with diesel. And then suddenly there was a bright bolt of lightning that said, well, guess what? We can take our natural gas product and power our trash trucks with it, and we moved forward with that. And we got some complaints. We got some complaints from the residents in the neighborhoods who couldn't hear their trash trucks anymore because they were too quiet and they weren't belching smoke, and they were like, well, I missed the trash pickup. You know, that's the kind of results we were getting with that. And it was great. You know, our drivers weren't sniffing fumes all day, and it turned out to be an excellent opportunity. And that's the kind of stuff that you can see with this. And a lot of other cities in the state are doing it. Frankly, I have every intention of picking off their things that work and plugging them into what we do here.
Questions of staff? Counselor Lehman?
I would caution on the batteries, 11 to 15 grand a piece when you do need them, and a special process to replace them. So there's a cost, an additional cost if you want to be a site that can actually replace your own. So you might want to look into that too. So I wouldn't keep the vehicles close to that life expectancy of that battery.
So Mayor and Councilmember Lane, it was interesting because when we were looking at the Ford stuff, clearly they've decided that's a problem with municipal fleets because those are the only people. They're not making these available to the general public yet. And typically, you know, they don't get that warranty very long on the batteries. Well, they're giving a really long warranty on the batteries, and they're going to end up taking them back. So I think the manufacturers slowly are coming around to develop a system because those batteries have a lot of value and they get recycled. And I think they're figuring, geez, there's probably a way we could do this smarter and better. So I think over the next few years, that will become probably less of an issue, and hopefully it will drive those costs down.
The voltage is extremely high. You gotta be very careful, especially with the secondary systems in the car. This says that we want to transition away from fossil fuel. I'm not one of those climate crazy people. I believe that the great floods of Noah's Day and the glaciers that created many of our mountain ranges and some of our valleys that we happen to live in one of them, created by a glacier, are cyclical. And I think the climate swings back and forth. I remember in '72 when the United States government was dropping ash on the Arctic Circle because they wanted the sun to attract to the ash to melt it because it was too cold. And now they're doing the opposite, saying it's too hot. So I think when government gets involved, usually they make it worse, so.
Other comments or questions of staff? Counselor Brennan?
So when we see projects in the future, will they be identified as a Green Step project?
Mayor and Council, yes.
Okay. I know that this was on the list of goals for the year for the staff, so I think that's great that you're moving forward with it.
Sounds like a motion.
Okay. I'll make a motion
Well,
with
then,
that.
thank you, staff. Counselor Brennan?
I make a motion to adopt resolution number R 2019-087, authorizing the city of Shakopee to participate in the Minnesota Green Step Cities program.
I have a motion and a second by Counselor Contreras. Further discussion? Discussion? Does the ASE people have training on those batteries, maintenance?
That's going to be a new industry.
To do to them, it's replacement.
Replacement, okay.
It'll spark a new industry, I bet.
Further discussion? Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. Thank you. Let's see here, 11A of the city bill list for our review. Any questions? All right, thank you very much. And liaison and administration reports, and I guess if for a change, we'll start with the administration report.
Well, Mr. Mayor, my only report would be, it was excellent to get in the community last night, to have all of us out there and to have staff out. And it's always refreshing to walk into the backyards and the nursing homes, et cetera, and then talking with our residents and seeing what's on their minds and having that connection that we don't normally get. And people sometimes are a lot more boisterous when they're in a crowd if they have something they need to talk about, and that's okay. We found a couple things that the Parks Department have already fixed today from one of the parks that the mayor and I and Chief Tate were at yesterday, and I was looking around, I'm like, all right, we got to take care of this stuff. Because those are things, we don't have that opportunity or time really to do that, and it's just a great program, and I'm talking about Night to Night, you know, like I said, it was great to see everybody, and it was great to see all of you out as well. It's incredibly important to all of us. Thank you. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you. Councilor Contreras.
I was really hoping you'd start that way so I could say one word, but I'll try it myself. All right, here we go. So on Wednesday, July 17th, I attended the first Community Advisory Committee that is working on ending maltreatment and abuse on children here in Scott County. That's always, I mean, something great to be part of, and it's close to, you know, we don't want to see that here in Scott County, especially not in Shakopee. Thursday, July 25th, attended the grand opening of the building dedication and of the SMSC Culture Center, the Hochikata Tea building, and that is a beautiful building. And I was very excited to see the investment they're putting for their youth, you know, to continue learning where they come from and never forget who they are and where they come from. So that was amazing. Thursday, August 1st, attended the third annual Pathway of the Shakopee History fundraiser hosted by the Shakopee Heritage Society. The first time I've attended, but I won't miss another one ever. Had a wonderful afternoon with great company, and I won a couple of my bids, so I was very excited for that one. Friday, August 2nd, I participated in coordinating of the entertainment of the SDA International Festival, where we received very good reviews. Crowd was the best turnout in the last 4 years that I have helped. The tacos were delicious, and they were only $1, so those were really good. And the Parade of Flags was a hit. I believe it's the first time they've done the Parade of Flags with all the actual flags and someone representing that country. Amazing, everybody liked that. And last but not least, last night, Night to Unite, checked out, I think it was like 6 or 7 parties that we were at. Wonderful, you know, great community, so much food, so much welcoming. I had a blast, and shout out to Team Violet with Officer Molly and Sherry. That we kind of forgot her once in the back seat of the squad car. That was it. Had a great time.
Councilor Contreras, fantastic report. Thank you.
Very well.
Councilor Whiting.
Yeah, how can I follow that now? But I also attended the Hochikata Tea opening, and you know, if you haven't been down to their museum, I recommend checking that out. It's a great part of it. They got a nice gift shop, great things for the youth, like you mentioned. Also was part of the Pathways of Shakopee History fundraiser, and I want to thank everybody on the council for either attending or donating. We had a brick there for you, Mr. Mayor. I know you were busy, but we could have got more money if you were there, I'm pretty sure. But thank you, everybody who took part of that, and staff. A lot of staff was involved, and I want to thank the staff for that, too. That project is hopefully nearing completion at Memorial Park. I'm going to move down to the riverfront and downtown, so we like to keep that moving. And then again, last night, Night to Unite, had a great time, hit about 7 parties. not as many kids, so I couldn't give my little freezies away. So I went over with Counselor Contreras to her church, and there was enough kids there to take care of the freeze pop issues, so they were gone. But it was a good time.
Great. My mayor report, I also attended the Shakopee, Minnewacan Sioux Community grand opening of their cultural center. I'm a history guy. I love that history. It's rich. It's compelling history. I value that very much. Monday night, I attended SPUC. Liaison Councilor Lehman was there to ask them to reconsider their non-action on the letter that that Bill Reynolds sent on June 7th. So they did send out a packet that we received. A lot of information in that and some of the questions. So it looks like possibly that they'll be answering the rest of the questions, but we're still, at least I am digesting that information that we got. Overview from Ellers, they're continuing with their cost of service study. So we'll see how that goes. Did attend the Night to Unite. It's always such a good feeling of the neighborhoods coming together, and we attend, the police, the fire. I think it's very important. I wish we could do it every week because it brings people together. Every stop, the cookies were really great, and I want to thank all the stops we were at for the cookies. Looking forward to having the new splash pad open, and we don't have a date, but maybe that's coming along pretty well. And also on Friday, August 16th at 3 p.m., we'll be having our groundbreaking at the old City Hall site for the new apartment. So 3 o'clock, August 16th. So, and that's my report.
Monday, attended SPUC meeting. Couple of things of note. The Ridge Creek transformer was put in and completed. Some of the other wiring still needs to be done, but the bigger stuff was getting there. Amazon undergrounding, a new feeder that was completed. Dorn had 2 out of 3 transformers completed. They're working on a third one, and I guess that's the last one for that area. The APGAR, I think it was a water looping or something for RAR's new improvement on this side of the highway. The contract was for like 70 cubic yards of rock removal, and it was like 9 times what the estimate was to get the job done. And there's a lot of bedrock downtown. We all know that. So I'm not sure they're going to look at how that's redone. They use WSB. They're real familiar with the area. Not really sure what went wrong there, but a lot of rock. It might have had something to do with the railroad's requirements and stuff too. July 19th, 2019, 104.5 megawatts was the peak. That's a new record for Shakopee's energy use. 104.5 megawatts. A lot of that has got to do when you've got added uses from new users. Still, they've got a lot of redundancy built into the system, so none of them are at full capacity. It just happens to be something they watch. Power outages, 1 was a car and pole, 2 were lightning strikes actually, and 3 were trees from straight line winds. And I think 1 of them was Prior Lake. After Mr. Mars left the meeting, they did actually pass a resolution to go back through the long list of questions and see which ones aren't answered in the packet of information or in the past. But they're only going to go back 10 years to roughly 2008. They figured it's just too time consuming, and what's happened 15, 20 years ago really doesn't. They're more focused on the future instead of what happened 20 years ago. But they were willing to go back and take, if there's a current policy, and try to research back on that current policy, roughly 10 years. And they did pass that, so I'm sure they'll be working on that. I think that's all I have, other than the Night to Unite, which was a blast, of course. What do we have, 7 or 8 stops, I think? People were awesome everywhere. The kids had just a ball in the cop car. Unbelievable. Playing with the speaker, honking them horns, playing the sirens. Actually, the balls that the city had, big hit with the kids too. So the fun was had by all. It was a beautiful night for it. It wasn't too hot and humid, and yeah, it was good.
Thank you, Counselor. Or, Mr. Reynolds?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Counselor Lehman, will the massive increases in 2007 and 2008 be included in that explanation?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I can ask them.
Yeah, I mean, it's very convenient to go only back 10 years.
Yeah, I think they did go back on some of them already, and I saw that in some of our packet information, but if there's specifics, we can sure try to find out.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Counselor Brennan?
Thank you. It's very different being the last to speak. I went to the barbecue and bluegrass with the seniors in July. And there's a lot of partnerships that were made, and people donated food and fun and good times. And I went to the grand opening of the Cultural Center with the SMSC. It was, like everybody said, it was very beautiful, very nice meal and opportunity to see what was going on. I've been invited to go to the Scott County Unified Transit Plan. The first meeting was a couple of weeks ago, and the purpose is to update the scale transit plan. And there was discussion about the MVTA, and so I presented I used our new updated comprehensive plan and talked about the employment areas and housing. We especially wanted to find out where high-density housing was going in. So that's going to be an ongoing meeting, and I'll be talking with one of our planners at the end of the week to get more information. I went to the Scale Executive Committee meeting. We discussed the 1- and 3-year goals, continuing having discussions on that. We reviewed the Scale 2019 legislative priorities and what happened and the results of those. So I have information if anybody would like that. And we approved going ahead with the jobs website. We had approved some money for the Live, Learn, and Earn at the end of the year. Well, I wasn't on that, but and then we're just saying go ahead and spend that money for a jobs website. I went to the Parks Plan open house, and we talked about the plan for the parks. And people can still review the park plan and make comments online. There's a link on the City of Shakopee website. I also went to the International Festival, and it was great. I watched Angelica run around and been frantic. And at the end, I was able to stop at the fire department water fight, and Shakopee came in 2nd and 3rd place. So yay team.
We need to make a requirement when we invite other communities in to play water fight with us that they have to lose, right?
Yeah, there you go. Those are always fun events. Well, great. Thank you, everybody, for your reports. Thank you, appreciate it. Item number 12, other business? Seeing none? Councilor Brennan?
Oh, I make a motion to adjourn to Tuesday, August 20th at 7 p.m.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Whiting. Further discussion? Discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, those opposed? Motion passes. We are adjourned at 9:35. Thank you, everybody.